Let's go through the process of setting up the save system. We'll start with a new empty scene. Add a Dialog Manager prefab. I'll add the demo's room prefab and player prefab also. Since the player prefab has a camera as a child game object, we can delete this main camera. The player also has a simple demo movement script. It reads from inputs named horizontal and vertical. Since we're using the input system package, we need to set up an input action registry so the script can access these inputs. Let's also make a cube that disappears when you step on it. We'll use the Dialog System's trigger event for this. And let's make a quest to step on the cube. We'll have this quest start active and visible in the quest tracking HUD. And then we'll set up the cube's trigger event to also call a Dialog System trigger to set the quest state. And let's test this out. Now that we have a working scene, let's set up the save system. The save system component acts as a persistent singleton, which means it survives scene change. You can add it to the Dialog Manager, which by default also acts as a persistent singleton, or you can put it on its own game object. I'll add it to the Dialog Manager here. The version value is included in saved games. If you significantly change what data is included in saved games, or how that data is saved, you may want to change the version value so that you can know which version a saved game file was saved in. If Save Current Scene is ticked, the saved game data will include the name of the currently open scene. When you load a saved game, it'll load that scene. Max save slot isn't technically a restriction since you can use any arbitrary number to identify saved games, but you may want to use this value in your own save and load menus, so it's provided here as a convenience. Frames to wait before apply data specifies the number of frames to wait after loading a scene, but before telling the savers in the scene to update their states from the saved game data. If you have game objects in the scene that aren't immediately ready as soon as the scene is loaded, you can increase this value to give them time to initialize first. The demo movement script is like this, so we'll set the value to 1 to give it 1 frame to initialize. The debug checkbox logs debug info to the console, which can be helpful if you're trying to track down a save issue. As mentioned earlier, the save system depends on a data serializer and a saved game data storer. The data serializer and saved game data storer are separate components, so you can replace them with your own custom versions if you want. For example, you could use a custom binary serializer instead of JSON data serializer. Or you could replace the disk saved game data storer or PlayerPref saved game data storer with a custom storer that uses cloud storage. This allows you to swap out these parts and the save system will happily work with your replacement versions. For now, we'll add a JSON data serializer and a PlayerPref saved game data storer. Next, we need to add savers. The save system doesn't just blindly try to save everything in the scene. You get to specify exactly what to include and what not to include in saved games. The save system provides several saver types shown in this list, and it's also easy to create your own. I'll include these links in the description. Add a dialogue system saver to the dialogue manager. This is an important one since it saves the dialogue system's data, such as variable values, quest states, and sim status if you're using it. When you add this component, the key defaults to DS. Save across scene changes is an important checkbox. To keep saved games small, you may want to save some savers' data only when the player is in that scene. If the player moves to another scene, it might not be important to remember that saver's info. If so, you can untick Save Across Scene Changes. For example, if you're using a saver to keep track of the position of an arrow flying through the air, you'll want to save its position if the player saves and immediately reloads the game in the same scene. However, if the player moves to a completely different scene, it might not be important anymore to remember the arrow's position. However, if the player has killed the game's big bad boss, that's important to remember regardless of what scene the player is in. In this case, make sure Save Across Scene Changes is ticked. Since we grabbed the player prefab from the demo scene, it already has a position saver. Let's set the key to player position. The position saver component has a Use Player Spawn Point checkbox. When changing scenes, this checkbox tells the position saver to check if the scene change has specified a player spawn point. If so, it moves the player to that spawn point instead of a saved position. This doesn't come into play when you're loading a saved game, however. The final saver we'll add is a destructible saver on the cube. This remembers if a game object has been destroyed or not. Set the key to a unique value like cube state. Since we're just deactivating the cube and not destroying it, set the mode to On Disable. Now the cube will save its state in saved games. You can alternatively use an active saver component to save the active-inactive state of game objects. Finally, we need a way to tell the save system to save and load. We'll first do this in a script. Create a script named Quick Save Load. We'll be using the input system and Pixel Crusher's dialogue system methods, so we put those in the using section. In Update, we'll check if the player has pressed F5. If so, we'll show an alert, saving, and tell the save system to save the game to slot 1. If the player presses F6, we'll show another alert and tell the save system to load the game from slot 1. So now we go back to Unity and add that script to the scene. And let's give this a play. I'll stomp on that cube and move somewhere else. And then I'll press F5 to save the game. Now we'll exit out and re-enter play mode. And now I'll press F6 and we can verify that all the savers are working. The quest is in the success state, the player's in the right position, and the cube is no longer there. In the next video, we'll show how to save and load without having to write a script.